Good morning, everyone. All right, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. My name is Yvette Avellano. I am the lead organizer here at EmpowerEd and one of the many contributors to the Promise of Flexible Scheduling for Schools, our report and playbook. So the staff at EmpowerEd is incredibly excited to share our report and to highlight the voices of DC teachers who took the time to share their experiences and solutions with us. We are also very grateful to our panelists for being here today and to share their perspectives on flexible scheduling. As many of us already know, DC has the highest teacher turnover rate in the nation, with approximately 20 to 30% of educators leaving the classroom each year. In a 2021 joint survey conducted by EmpowerEd and the Washington Teachers Union, DC educators listed flexible scheduling as the most impactful solution that would keep them in the teaching profession. The results of this survey pushed EmpowerEd to conduct more surveys, research, and focus groups to define and understand what type of flexibility is actually going to make a difference for educators, while also seeing what benefits various flexible scheduling models offer students and families. The bulk of our report and playbook is the result of DC educator testimonies from both public and public charter school educators, which we gathered from our most recent survey that we put out in late 2022. We received thousands of comments, which emphasize how impactful and meaningful job flexibility is. In particular, we received comments from educators with children and educators who identify as Black women, who rated flexible scheduling significantly higher than other respondents as a solution that would keep them in the teaching profession for longer. Additionally, DC principals were also surveyed. Those school leaders who already implemented a form of flexible scheduling have witnessed how rewarding and beneficial these types of schedules are for teachers and students. Overall, what we are seeing in our survey is that educators are asking for balance between their personal and professional lives. It goes without saying that educators exist as individuals outside of their classroom. They have responsibilities and needs that persist alongside the ups and downs of the teaching profession. Put simply, educators are asking for the time to manage their passion for teaching and their personal lives and well-being. In our presentation today, led by Scott Goldstein, who is our executive director and lead author of the report, we will be honing in on the results of our survey, various models of flexible scheduling for your schools, and recommendations for how to implement these flexible scheduling models. In writing this report, it is clear that there are logistical challenges. However, we truly believe that schools with the proper community support, resources, and input can achieve flexible scheduling models that benefit teachers, students, and families. I will now pass it off to Scott Goldstein for the flexible scheduling report and playbook.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to our panelists for a great panel we're going to have in just a few moments. We want to start just by presenting this report. This is the culmination of 2 years of work at EmpowerEd since this survey that we did just over 2 years ago, which found flexible scheduling to be the most impactful solution that educators said would retain them and keep them in the classroom. And since we received the results of that survey, we've really dedicated ourselves to diving into this deeper, to doing the research we needed to do, to having the focus group with educators, with principals, with also interview to find out exactly what this would look like, what models exist already, what doesn't exist, and what this might look like in our context here in DC. I will say there is actually one of the DCPS exit surveys that was released back in 2018 through Bellwether Education Partners, with an earliest indicator in our DC context that those teachers, actually the teachers rated highly effective in that survey, rated flexible scheduling as also as the thing that would retain them most longest in the classroom. And so since we've seen the results of that survey and our own survey 2 years later, we really thought this was an issue we needed to dive into deeper. And so we're really glad to be able to put all of that together into the report and playbook that we're presenting today. So the report and playbook goes through the changing face of school and work. We'll talk about that briefly, but as we know, the pandemic has really changed work and workplaces at large. And really what this is about is can our education system catch up to the trend that is happening across the workplaces? And if we don't, what are the consequences for losing our employees, for losing our best talent to professions that are providing a higher degree of flexibility? We'll talk about what flexible scheduling is, how we define that, the results of our recent survey this year, what potential models exist in sample schedules, which is the heart of it, because every time we've talked about this for 2 years, principals especially have said, show me the schedules. What does the schedule look like? Give me the sample. So we can start to dive into this deeper. And so that's really what we focus on here. What are the benefits for educators, the benefits for students, here from our principal perspectives, and then also our recommendations and guidance report. So I'm turn it over now, and throughout the report reading, we'll have some of our folks from EmpowerEd, Valentina, Gracie, and Gabrielle to read some of the educator perspectives and quotes that are contained in the report from the over 2,000 comments that we received from educators on this topic.
Good morning, everyone. We are living in unprecedented times, and the demands upon each of our lives are strong, real, and taxing. The world is unfolding to meet these demands, and the field of education should catch up. Within our schools, we're feeling the effects of pandemic across the board. Students have suffered immensely, and so have educators. Yet somehow, the mental and emotional toll the pandemic has had on educators gets lost, and demands increase. Greater scheduling flexibility would definitely keep me in the field longer, said a decent teacher.
And so that really provides a good context for the moment we're in, why we feel like this is so needed. Let's talk about our definition, because really what's fundamental, I'm not going to read what you can see on the screen, but really what's fundamental about this to us is that flexible scheduling is a solution that is both beneficial to students and to educators. That this is a solution for educator retention, and that's how we got into this work, but also that we care about this because it has the opportunity to modernize and enrich the student experience the way students have been asking for and families have been asking for a long time. So when we talk about the definition, it's something that both will help with staffing, give them time for collaboration, give educators additional time and well-being that they need, but also provide those opportunities for our students. We're going to look at the survey very briefly. We had over 1,100 respondents. They came from 155 individual schools. I think we have, Deputy Mayor will tell me exactly, over 200, close to 250 maybe in total individual school sites. So our survey represented about 155 of those in the respondents with substantial samples from over 100 of them across both DC public schools and DC charter schools. And you can see most respondents told us no, they don't have a model of flexible scheduling right now, but even represented in that almost 13% that do have some flexibility, we heard from over 35 schools that are already implementing some model that they call flexible scheduling in their schools. And you heard a lot from the principals of those schools and the educators of those schools what it would take to do it better. And then you can see the percentages that say they will likely leave after this year or likely leave in the next 1 or 2 years, which is the driving motivation for us as we try to increase educator retention. I will say just about our sample, this is also in the report, but you'll see that the survey results do skew to more experienced teachers and lack some first-year teachers. And so we think, that number, especially in terms of those who might leave, does skew towards younger teachers often leaving the profession. So those numbers could be even higher about those likely to leave.
A quote from a Ward 5 charter school teacher. It is the single thing that makes or breaks my teaching career. I'm considering leaving school, a place that I love and feel valued, because my job is too many hours. And I don't think I can realistically have a family and also continue doing the job I'm doing. I desperately want to stay, but I need one or multiple of these flexible models in your survey to happen in order to be able to.
A quote from a DC teacher. I never have time to get anything done in my personal life. I always have to take time off and in doctor's appointments, and never evening availability. By the time I get done with work, I'm exhausted and burnt out. I've faced a lot of burnout already as a second-year teacher. I've already contemplated leaving the profession numerous times. I can see why the turnover is so high. It makes complete sense. I think flexible scheduling would help with burnout significantly as long as it does not change my pay. As it is, I can barely afford to live in the same city as a teacher.
Thank you. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into the survey results now, but we asked them, as we do in our survey of educators each year, what are the things that would be most impactful to you staying in the classroom? Again, 2 years ago, flexible scheduling was the #1. In this survey, it was the #3 thing that educators said, but I would say the difference between numbers 1 and 5 was like 0.01%. So these, if you look at the number 1 to 5 here, these are all the really top things, right, recorded by educators. Higher pay, of course, guaranteed mental health days, which really goes hand in hand with flexibility and educator wellness, flexible scheduling or planning time and healthier school buildings. All things we know are important to those advocating in education spaces in our city. I think really important to note, and this was very evident in the comments, that particularly Black women, especially Black women over 30, significantly ranked flexible scheduling as something that would be more impactful to them and higher on their scale. And I think that's really important when we think about who our teaching force is, who our teaching force has historically, what it has historically been, what we're trying to maintain in terms of the reflection of our students in our educator workforce and staff. So we're going to start going through the actual schedules. We'll go through them very briefly because there's a lot here. But the first is an enrichment day or camp day model. This is where you take 4 days a week and you keep them basically the same, but on the 5th day, whether that be a Wednesday or Friday or another day, you're really concentrating on student enrichment. That might be high impact tutoring that we've done a lot in recent years. That might be individualized and targeted instruction. It might be outdoor learning. It might be actually one of the most interesting comments in the entire report, the survey to me, was someone who said, you know, wealthy families in this city get all of the opportunities for camps, for these summer camps that happen. And my students never get to go to all these summer camps. What if we took 1 day a week and took these summer camps, who would probably love to do so, and give them a day of school to come in and provide those kind of opportunities for our students? These are people waiting to do that kind of work, right? With contracts or with partnerships with them, we could give our low-income students who don't get those opportunities in the summer, some of those opportunities right there during the school day, while giving our educators flexibility. A lot of opportunities for how that could look. Certainly costs money for additional staff. We'll talk in partnerships, we'll talk about that, but it's really exciting in terms of what can be done for our students, as well as the educator flexibility. A couple more quotes.
Quote, as a district, our focus is to serve the whole child. There's currently not time for that. There should be dedicated times to wellness for students on a more consistent basis. Tutoring, food and nutrition education and services, making more time for play with downtime with choices like reading, yoga, journaling, speaking with a mental health professional, etc. Ward 4 DCPS teacher.
Another quote from a Ward 4 teacher. I have perpetual guilt about passing my stress on to my students. No matter how hard we try to shield them, it is inevitable that they pick up on it. All students would benefit from happier, healthier, less stressed out teachers. And students need a break. Field trips, outdoor activities, science, STEM days would be very valuable.
All right, so we're going to look at a few more models quickly. While there's the option of setting 1 day aside entirely, there's also the option of doing a half day a week. We've heard from elementary school principals in particular that this is a challenge for them, that flexible scheduling is a little more difficult for them, having 8 grades to figure out what to do with the students when those flexible hours take place. And I will say, I heard from one elementary school principal in particular, if we could do a half day every other week or a half day once a month, I could do that right away. We have the school partnerships with that in place, right? So a half day model might work for some schools. And that would be, you know, the Wednesdays were very popular and we had them during the pandemic. So that's a good option. It breaks up the week in a nice logical way to take a half day and do those same kind of enrichment opportunities. The rotating drop schedule, this is something that's actually used widely in the UK, we found in our research. And what is done here is essentially, let's say you have 6 or 7 periods in the day, the last period would drop each day. So every class would happen 4 times essentially in a week and not happen on the 5th day. You'd rotate which class does not happen at the end of the day. So you could free up an hour, hour and a half at the end of each day to make that flexible time. But you could preserve, let's say your strategy was we need more time for ELA and math. If you have 6 or 7 classes, not all of them have to drop. So ELA and math could still happen 5 days a week while others don't, or maybe we're trying to provide students additional enrichment in other subjects. So languages still gets to happen 5 days a week. So you can kind of make those strategic decisions. High school later start. I gotta say, this is one of my favorites as a former high school teacher. And I'll tell you why. I taught a debate class at Roosevelt High School, and I assigned the students a debate topic once, which was about school start times. And I had half the students, they were assigned, you have to make the case that the start time should be earlier, and you guys have to make a case for a later start time. I had them go do their research. And they came back and one of the teams was like, I cannot make the case that it should be earlier. It's like, why not? They're like, because I can't find any research. And I was like, all right, well, let me do some research for you. Let's see if I can find something. And if you're searching hard enough, I'll give you some tips on some Google searching. I found the research, and that's because it doesn't exist, right? The CDC, the NIH have both released reports about later start times for high school. The evidence is abundant. It's been recommended by the US Department of Education, among others, that high school start time should not start before 8:30 or 9 at a minimum. And the ideal start time, I think this was recommended by NIH, if I'm not wrong, is 10 a.m. for high school. And that was based on teen sleep cycles and what they recommended for the average teen sleep cycle, which is it's normal for them to sleep from midnight to 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. So there's a lot of complication to trying to make this happen, but there's a lot of value in terms of the wellness for our high school students. You could build in the flexible time for student or for teachers before the students arrive. In some cases, the students arrive later. In this model, you have the actual formal classes starting at 10:26 and going until 4:30. So you're pushing the schedule back a little bit. There's also potentially some benefits for what we've seen happen in after school hours, where there's a lot of concerns with teenagers going out onto the street, leaving school without formal activities to do, and where they're not supposed to be home yet. So we have this gap where high school students leave school. They're not supposed to be home for dinner or whatever they're doing at home that evening yet. So they have a couple hours just to hang out, right? And that's something we've been trying to address as a city. Moving the start time back and the end time back could help address that part as well. And we do have to think about winter, darker hours coming earlier. There's a lot of things to think about there, but I think it is a promising model. Community service days. This is actually a schedule submitted to us directly by a teacher at a middle school in DC, where they're saying we want our middle school students to be involved in community service. We'd like the enrichment day model, but why don't we focus it that way? And they suggested this schedule to us. There's the teachers choosing their schedule, which has been suggested by several people within our education sphere here in DC. In terms of letting educators choose, do I want to work, for example, 7 to 2, 9 to 4, 12 to 7, there would be different shifts for educators. And what that actually does on the student end is it provides more hours of student-facing services than we traditionally have. You have to add staff to do it, maybe as many 3 or 4 staff per school, but with overlapping schedules, right? They still are overlapping by at least a couple hours with the other shifts. And so it would really just be a question for the scheduling softwares to figure out, right, how do you program that in. Now, what's exciting about that is it can also be, in a sense, a retention bonus. You could say to your teachers who are coming back to the same school, you get to choose your schedule first, right? And once they've all chosen, they get that flexibility. You're recruiting new teachers for what's left, right? So it really can drive you to stay, because if staying means you get to choose your schedule, there's going to be a big drive to stay at a school for a longer period of time. Then we would recruit new teachers and say, what's available is 7 to 2, or what's available is that later schedule, and that's what we're hiring for. Career progression. So this is new teachers, and then big career teachers and veteran educators having different schedules, differentiating them for professional development support. So that could be a reduced schedule for new teachers while they have a mentor or while they're learning from a more experienced educators. Mid career teachers having flexible time that's more focused on their professional development. And then veteran educators having flexible time that's focused on them supporting newer teachers, right? And being able to then choose what courses they most want to teach, because I'll say, 10 years teaching, I was like, these are the courses I teach. I really want my P course still. I really want my US government course. So giving that better educators that flexibility. Really passionate about this one, supporting and retaining our new parents. So I left teaching after my second child. And a big driving force of that was just this job is not flexible enough. My wife is also a teacher. And so one of us has to have some flexibility for this to work, right? And neither of us did. How can we drop our kids off in the morning? How can we pick them up on time? How can we, get groceries or do the things that our family needs to do if both of us are teachers? And we have a lot of 2-teacher families. So even with 1 teacher in a family, allowing new parents the ability to work a reduced schedule could be hugely impactful. And then also, they retain their full benefits being very important. There are schools already in DC that allow new parents and others to go to a reduced schedule. But it comes to pay, and that, right? So they could say, yes, you can work 50% schedule, you work 50% pay. I will say that the schools that do that already, they do retain benefits, full-time benefits, so that's really important to it. But maybe we say we're going to subsidize 25% of this. So you can work a 75% schedule and still receive full pay and benefits for a year or for 2 years after you have a child, could be a huge retention bonus. So we're going to turn it over to some quotes from our parents, educators who are heavily.
Quote from a Ward 3 ECPS teacher, particularly as a career changer that used to have more flexibility, albeit with a similarly demanding workload. I find myself struggling to imagine how I can sustain the lack of flexibility and the demands of the long-term job, particularly when I know I can make more money elsewhere. I'm a single mom of 3 and can't really afford to turn down more money and more flexibility if the opportunity arises.
And the next quote continues. Since I had my first kid 5 years ago, I've been constantly conscious about whether or not I can remain in the classroom given the challenges of my schedule. Now that we have 2 kids to drop off to different places before 8 a.m., it feels even more untenable. I'm appealing to the administration of my school to see if they're able to make an exception for my situation and allow me to start my day later. If I were to have the option to work a 75% schedule and drop a class, I almost certainly would have done that. Ward 3 DCPS.
Another quote. This year, having a flexible schedule has changed my life completely. I went from teaching full-time as a kindergarten teacher to having twins. I now have 3 kids under 3. And there was no way I could continue to manage the workload while raising my family. I was willing to lose the pay to decrease my hours per week, but I didn't want to stop working with children. Having job flexibility has allowed me to continue serving for DCPS students while also raising my own kids. I'm so grateful to have a principal that appreciates the work I've done and wants to support me professionally. I recognize this as a privilege. Ward 3 DCPS.
And also, I love that we heard in the survey from teachers who already have flexibility as well, about how appreciative they were, how it's retaining them, how appreciative they are of the principals, because a lot of times it's not that the school has a flexible schedule, but the principal has worked hard to give individuals the flexibility they need. Other proposed models, and there were a lot, we don't have time to go into them because we got probably 100 or 200 different models proposed by teachers. 4 days in person, 1 virtual. Paul Public Charter School is doing that this year. 4 days a week, a year round. A job share option where you're splitting that job with another educator that's 50-50. Increased time for specials. And there was a lot about how we split up our specials teachers, our elected teachers, and our core academic teachers. I just heard from Principal Burko, maybe you could share this later, that they've done this at Howard University Middle, but try to make 3-day weekends into 4 weekends for teachers as a small additional flexibility, providing teachers comp time for additional duties, mental health days, office hours, tailored schedules if people are pursuing higher degrees and they need an earlier release, for example. And then again, prioritizing educators with children, perhaps for that first period off, so they're able to drop their own kids off at school. Staffing, we'll talk a lot about this in the panel, but we have a lot of community partners in Washington, D.C., and that's a huge advantage. People who are currently out of school time partners, how can we make them in school time providers as well? We have City Year, we have AmeriCorps, we have a huge pool of retired educators. I'll raise my hand as a former educator who would love to teach 1 day a week if that were an option to me, right? So a lot of people would like to stay connected to teaching in that way. Alternating schedules, and then of course building the pipeline through things like grow your own programs. The investment. So no doubt this is a significant investment. What we have called for is a $10 million pot of money as a grant program that any school to do flexible scheduling could apply to utilize those funds to hire the school partners, to hire the additional staff it would take to implement the model that works for their school. This is tailored, this is individual, right? It does not work to apply a single flexible model to a whole city or even a whole grade band across the city. Schools have to figure out the model that works for them, but what they need is the resources to get it done. We heard that a lot from principals in our survey. And so if they can tap into that pool of money and apply for those, we think that would be a feasible way to get it started with pilots. And over the first couple of years, we'll see which programs are most successful and how we can try to scale them. Scaling them would be, of course, an enormous expense across the city to try to do this citywide. But if we look at other investments that we've done over the past decade or 2 in DC, like making, I looked up actually when I was preparing for this, like how many schools districts still have half-day kindergarten? It's a ton. And there was a huge cost to making kindergarten full time. Then we made pre-K 3 and 4 free. We've done some huge things in DC that haven't been done in other places that were investments that really paid off for families. And we think about that in this bucket of transformative things for both students and educators. So there's a cost to it, but it's also a transformative experience for our students, educators, and payoff for our school.
A quote from Principal Micah Westerman from City Center Public Charter School. Every Wednesday, students are released early and teachers participate in professional development. However, because maintaining a work-life balance is important to us at City Center or Center City, once a month, our Wellness Wednesdays give our campus space staff an additional 3 hours to take care of themselves. Staff can go to the doctor, take a spa day, or just sit back and relax and enjoy the free afternoon. Wellness Wednesdays have been in place for over 5 years, and the initiative continues to get positive feedback from our staff. There's always going to be too much to accomplish in too little time. However, prioritizing wellness helps all use the time we have more efficiently and with more joy.
Another quote from a DC principal. I think it could improve retention and morale. Happy invested teachers equals happy kids and fewer staff absences. Having more flexibility can ease the burden of meeting subs, which are rarely available. My strategies are to always approve requested leave, be generous and flexible when possible. As a parent myself, I connect with them on that level and remind them that their family is their first priority over a job. We also provide a lactation room area. We strive to hold all meetings during the workday. Flexible schedules for principals should also be explored. We are 12-month employees with a lot of evening meetings and no flexibility. Consider an 11-month model for comp time to offset the evening meetings.
Wanted to make sure we allowed that principal to get that plug in, because we heard a lot from our principals, and principals have just an incredibly demanding job as well. And so my recommendations now, you can read through that in the report. You have to make sure the schools have adequate funding to make it work. You have to tackle regulations together that might get in the way. We have to think about building consensus first. This was, I know the CEO of Paul has talked about this a lot in the model that they built this year, how important it was to make sure students, parents, and families, teachers were all on the same page about the model before they launched into it. So building that consensus first, activating those OST providers, PAMs, working with union partners. So these things might require an addendum or an additional MOU on contracts, whether they be with the WTU or paraprofessionals unions or our principals unions, thinking about how that would happen. Requiring and funding mental health days. Seat hour requirements might have to change in some cases. So working with OSSI on some of those things, and including attendance requirements. Our rights of before and after care. This is pretty fundamental, not necessarily to the first year or two of pilots, but it's pretty fundamental if we start scaling citywide. Because if people don't have before and after care, you start having staggered schedules throughout the, that could create an undesirable situation between our elementary, middle, and high school, right? So making sure students have a right to aftercare in particular would be very important to the success of scaling this at a citywide level. Easing time mandates for imposed curriculums. There's principals, one network I heard from several principals who said, we have these imposed curricula that we have to do that are required to be this long. So we just couldn't make the flexibility in that path without some flexibility on the curriculum mandates. And then reforming HR protocols, allowing for people to teach part-time. And then our guideposts, make sure we're prioritizing all school staff, not just lead teachers. Union collaboration, considering student age and family, you know, if there's older siblings who have to take their younger siblings to school, how do we make sure that coordinates in the right way? And then of course, safe passage, how people will get to school, considering things like a high school later start time and other ideas that we talked about already. A couple more quotes.
A quote from a Ward 8 CBS teacher. I think having less time in the school building, sitting and learning content and more real world experiences would be more beneficial for students. In my perfect school, students to be out at museums, grocery stores, farms, music shops, clothing retailers, art studios, banks, mechanic shops, businesses, corporations, learning about different types of career paths and how they want to show up in the world. That aligns with their most authentic self. The traditional school setting is not for all children, and all students deserve to be exposed to areas that make them feel empowered and seen.
And another quote reads, flexible schedules can also help provide more opportunities. For example, a 3-day instructional week with one planning or prep day for teachers and school-wide support for students, like study hall, and then 1 day of life preparation, meaning sex education, job-related education, finances, how to do taxes, how to change a tire, barbershop, youth classes, cooking, marketing, public relations, religious education, Use that one day to provide tools that will take our students further in life. Ward 7, DCPS teacher.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Valentina and Gracie and Gabrielle for bringing those educator perspectives to us this morning. And we're going to call up our panel for a discussion on everything we just heard about. So I'm going to call up the panelists to come take a seat. Who wants to go? Hey, panelists, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm going to allow you to introduce yourselves. We'll go down the line, and the thing I want to start this panel with is we heard a lot about what this could provide for students to make school more enriching for them. So what was it for you? What made school enriching for you outside of the academic core and your favorite subject? What made you want to come to school every day as you give us an introduction to yourself and your role?
Catherine Proko, and I am the executive director at the Howard University Middle School. What made me want to come to school was just interacting with my friends. And doing some stuff that I really love.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Reed, and I'm the director of adult learning at Kramer Middle School, elementary teacher and school life enrichment teacher. And as a student, one thing that I enjoyed about coming to school was really just the interaction with my teacher, because they believed in me and spoke life into me, so I can be where I am today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lucia Applequist. I'm a teacher at Bell Multicultural High School this year. And what brought me into school my last senior years, I didn't slide completely, is an internship where I got to go to an architecture firm for a half day for the entire year, which is incredible. And also when you realize I don't like architecture.
My name is Ilana Mens. I'm the founder and executive director of Urban Adventure Squad, a DC-based nonprofit. I loved some theater, some sports. I love teachers who not just ask me questions and challenge me, but also really listened and picked up on the things that they knew about me and knew I loved, and try very hard to use that as a motivation for students.
My name is April Patrick, and I'm a junior at Development School for Arts. The reason why those schools mainly due to my friends and teachers, because it's a very unique approach to schooling that Development has, and I really trained at it quite rapidly.
Thank you.
I'm Paul, I'm the deputy mayor for education. Maybe unsurprisingly, given my job, I was love school and all of it. If I have to say the non-academic stuff, I would say the drama club where I was the very early.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we heard a lot about these enriching activities that happen, and we want to think about how we can make more space for those for our students in schools with flexibility. I'm going to turn to our teachers first as we start here and talk a little bit about work-life balance. So we've always called it work-life balance, right? For a very long time. And Gracie is here, our director of educator wellness, and she was the first one who introduced me to the term, I think, work-life harmony. And really, that is what people started to see during the pandemic, which was, you know, I'm teaching from home. Most teachers really did not like it, the virtual teaching, having to prepare everything again. But there was a benefit, right? Which was I'm home and I can do other things. Okay, for my students, the interaction I love, but I can do the laundry, I can go to the doctor's appointment that I might not be able to go to otherwise. And it wasn't that like work happened here and then life happened, right? There was a harmony between work and life. So I want to think about how we can try to make that. So I want to ask our teachers first, how do we make that happen? What does it look like to have work-life harmony?
For me, so I'm 29 years old, not yet 30, and I have Rolls Royce of teacher schedules. I have one prep, and I have planning at the end of the day. So it's incredible, and I still have to take a nap at the end of every single day. Like I walk in my apartment and I hit the couch for at least 30 minutes because I'm so exhausted, and I don't have a partner, and pet even. I just have me to take care of. So in order to get that harmony, I do need a day of sitting and thinking about what I'm teaching, which is what I do normally, but now I just do it on Saturdays, which is unfortunate for my social life. And I would like to get my things done that I need to get done that I can't do at the end of the days that I really should. So just a single day, whether it's Friday, whether it's Monday. I did have half days on Wednesdays, but we fill that with professional development, which is beneficial in some ways, but also to the rest. So just respect for my time for this discussion.
Work-life balance or harmony, I like to call it work-life choices, because I think it gives me more control in strategizing how I choose to live my life. I think about, I just got married and, during the summer, I still spent a lot of time with my school family instead of my husband, and I'm neglectful in that. But I would love to have a schedule where I could, just go on vacation. People, I don't get to do those kinds of things because I'm just so invested in making sure that we have opportunities for our students, for our staff. And that is my biggest joy right now. So flexible scheduling would really just be a spot for me to be whole, for my students to be whole, and I want to see that for them.
No, this doesn't just apply to our teachers, so if anybody else wants to hop in, what does work-life harmony look like to you? What may the promise be with what we've been talking about today?
I think for me as a nonprofit executive director who's not in this field before 10 years ago, I was in a job that offered me some flexibility while I was, all my children were young. Tried really hard at Urban Adventure Squad to emulate that, to make sure that we have as much flexibility, because the most important thing is that when we show up for the kids in the morning, for our full day programs, or for school visits, we have to be well rested and we have to be ready for everything. And I give out classroom teachers pretty much every day of my work, because they are doing that 5 days a week with no flexibility and space preference.
Yeah.
I think work-life harmony, rhythm is about children. And one thing that teachers don't have is they don't have a choice, because the children come no matter what. And so being able to say, you know what, I'm not coming today because I have another teacher's going to take my space, and to be able to make those choices. And as I'm learning with our, younger staff, that, birthday is really important. Birthday means vacations and going to Jamaica and whatever else. Big birthdays, thank you God for the birthday, but it's something different. And so being able to do that and not understanding that, okay, you're going to be gone for 3 days because it's birthday time. So the choice.
Yeah. We talked about a lot of different models here today, and there's a lot more in the report. What excites you? And I think maybe we'll go in reverse order here and start with the deputy mayor. What excites you about what you saw? And as you think about this, about the potential models?
So first of all, I would say, I think this is an incredibly important contribution to what I would think of the citywide conversation about teachers and teaching profession. I think I love seeing the models down to the detail of what the schedules look like, because I think that's the way that helps people understand what we're talking about. We're talking about flexible schedule. I think a lot of this actually lives in different places. The most remarkable number that I saw was that 13% of teachers surveyed are currently experiencing some flexibility, which I think a lot of heart from. Because I know we need to do a lot more to promote this profession. Professions like DC have wonderful things for teachers and to work. I think I was most inspired, honestly, about high school start time, because I know that research very well, and I think about it all the time, and I constantly consider how hard it would be to do anything like that. But I think that's an inspiration to do that. So there's a lot going on in the city, and we'll talk about it, but I think that was what I do. Thank you. April.
As a high schooler, as the deputy said before, and later start to high schools, or even like getting the one zero Friday off, I think that's super important, because as a high schooler, like literally yesterday, I was so tired that I could barely get out of bed. And I was like, another day of school? And for New Wellington specifically, our school day starts at 8 and it ends at 4:55. That's a whole work day. And we have to do that every single day. It doesn't make any sense. And it would also give high schoolers a chance to actually like take care of home responsibilities and have adult like responsibilities.
Yeah.
They have jobs, they have to work. And especially as like a minor and having to take care of all these responsibilities and then having to take care of academics and then having to take care of your relationships, personal and non-personal, it's just too much. And I don't think the current model, they're allowing us the time to do that and mature into adults.
I'm excited about the half day or full day possibility because a lot of that is already going on. A lot of community-based partners are already working with schools to make that happen. So if there's public charter school that has an early release day at 12:30, 1 o'clock, organizations like ours will come in and students through maybe the end of aftercare, which is Sean there. And I think that's absolutely possible because we already have demonstration models to show that it's not. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Thank you, Shepard, here. I hear from my seniors, one, when I told them I was doing this panel and talking about flexible schools, flexible schedules, they went, yeah. Because they want school to be a little bit more interactive, a little bit more entertaining. And with my old half day schedule as an actual senior, I can say it may be exciting as an adult because I have that adult responsibility. But I do think that in DC, we have such an opportunity to get local kids into government, into politics, and I think those community leaders are there. They're just waiting for their opening. So I think that's the most exciting.
And to add, I really believe that wellness is academic as well as wellness. So at Kramer Middle School, we do have flexible scheduling models. And we've been, changing it as time goes on based on the needs of what works. So in the beginning of the school year, we had town halls, we had high PE, where the students could participate in physical education, as well as social emotional strength, bringing community partners. But we then shift and we kind of took away high PE and the town hall, really because of staffing. And if we had more financial power to bring in more staff to make that happen, we probably would have kept that model. So now it's kind of shift to now the teachers have more time off to do professional development, grade papers and all of that. But now some staff are overloaded with other work so the teachers can have time off. So really flexible scheduling works when you have the financial power, the community support to make that happen.
I'm excited about teachers being allowed to choose it. We struggle often to figure out what do we do for that veteran teacher, and money is nice, but there needs to be something else, and to be the one that say, hey, get the pick. I'm that you're going to work. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I want to go to our student now to start this one, April, and just talk about the student experience. So how might flexible schedules and the kind of things that we've talked about today actually enrich your experience, and what kind of opportunities would you like to see if we had that flexibility?
It's the first question. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, just what kinds of opportunities, right, would you like to see exist if you had more flexibility?
Obviously close, honestly. And I say that because a lot of schools, I think they get out at like 3:30 to 4. But at 2010, we don't get out until 4:55. And that only leaves time to get home or to like eat. And I would really enjoy to have an after school program. Like, because the only time we have club time is during lunch. And and our lunches are only like 40 minutes or an hour if we're lucky. And I just want to do what normal high school kids do at that point. I just want to go to the club. I want to meet different people from different departments. I want to go home at a normal response. I want to get school at 5. I want to do all that. And so go home. Yeah. And what was your second question?
Yeah, that's it. Just the kinds of opportunities, and I'd love to hear from anybody else too about what kinds of opportunities, and maybe Alana, from your role, thinking about what kind of opportunities can we provide us in that space.
I think one of the things that defines and drives how we think about our approach with working with teachers in schools is that our US public education system has set up this idea that indoors is for learning and outdoors is for fun. So kids are inside pretty much all day, educators are inside almost all day with the exception of recess. All of our programs are outdoors and use school grounds and as the teaching space at the time. Because within that, we know that we can take the students, as DCPS registered program providers, we have what we need to be good partners and also give the teachers a breather. So lots of times our approach is when we're coming into a school, we'll say to the teacher, here's our lesson plan. You can review it, you can join us, or you can just be with us and watch. But it's important for you to know that we have it, and we're okay running the whole class, and running the whole outdoor time. And so, you know, we will do history, and we'll do garden education, and we'll do sort of everything that we can work with teachers to point to the curriculum unit, so that our time with them does not cause them to scramble and make up for that time, because that was a fun field trip, but it didn't have anything to do with it. We're working to meet the goals of that unit so that they can continue on for their next lesson. When you have 3-4 hours to do that, it's a treat for organizations like ours. And as you pointed out earlier in the report, we have lots of organizations that only do after school programming, and it's almost like an appetizer, but imagine if they had a half day from things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's so many exciting ones that students are already involved in. They love to do. My kids do footprints at their school. There's so many that are already in our schools, and the students feel like it's short, right? Like they get out there and they barely start something, and then they're going back indoors. And we also know the research about the mental health benefits of students being outdoors during the school day with the classes that happen after that and their attention. Anybody else on the student experiences?
I'll just offer the one thought that we obviously did a bunch of piloting around this during the pandemic. And one thing we started was trying to figure out ways for EPR to push into schools. And now we've got in the summer, these things we call boost camps, which is basically EPR schools, that primarily recreation because it's summer, but with some academic enrichment. And we're talking to EPR about how that might work during the school year. Because you could imagine now that we're getting professional recreators who are providing just fun and engagement, which is what we all want for our sports activities in school buildings, partner with school communities, what that could look like. More of that during that school year.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Principal Prokop now, just on the principal perspective of someone who's worked with this, right, and started to implement flexible scheduling at your own school. And so just talk to us a little bit about your motivation. I know there was, to start this and shift to this model, what your successes and challenges have been so far and your perspectives on actually trying it out.
So motivation for us was we had high amount of turnover after the pandemic. We had young people going to Amazon and influence kinds of things, and like an educator, and now this is better. And so we had to go in to figure out something else. And so we did ask questions. We asked, what would make this better for you? And so we did a few things. We extended every federal holiday to a 4-day weekend. And it actually helped because people had an opportunity. They knew that 4-day was coming, and so they planned it. We had to add a day in March, but we teaching on March has been. And so we had to put something in there because you need to break those things up. We do have that Wednesday, half day Wednesday, and 1 day a month is a wellness day. So kids need teachers. And we do still have some parents who need that coverage. So we do have some folks in there doing some of those for our students. And so again, like we're talking, people always, we don't live to work, we work so we can live. And so we have to make sure that we're providing the opportunities for them to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, you're doing more than one flexible model actually at the same time, right? You're talking about a lot of the little things that were suggested by teachers about the 3-day weekends into 4-day weekends, which I will say is, teachers are taking off anyway, right? And then you're like, how do we manage the sub coverage to make this 3-day weekend the day after the 3-day weekend work, or there's a blackout days and there's frustration with that. And so those are little things that add up, but also embedding it into the actual weekly schedule. And I think we heard a lot from principals in the report about what they could provide, right, teachers in doing that. And I think one thing that really stood out to me is, and this is always my perspective as an educator, and it's like one little extra thing, right? It's not that teachers are like, I really just want to leave teaching, right? It's like, I'm really looking for any reason I can stay. Can someone give me something, right? So that I can have a reason to stay, because it's not that we're like, I don't like teaching anymore. This is not the job for me, right? And it's, so people are saying, you know, can I get a glimmer of hope and next year is going to be a little easier for me? And if it's going to be a little easier, I'm going to stick it out to next year. And if I still keep seeing that in the future, you know, we can really keep retention going in the long term. Any other thoughts on just how schools provide that?
I was thinking, while everybody was speaking about what school is actually for, and I think the model that we're using right now, where kids sit in a room is really integrated, like 20th century, like we're not there anymore. And we also have this advent of social media technology where like my kids love TikTok so much that they will sit on it during the class and they're supposed to be doing literally anything else. And that's because school is boring, TikTok is fun. And if you switch it up and give them opportunities to make hobbies, opportunities to meet people in clubs and just give them a different name, right, or a different face, I think that they would put their phone away in a minute and not spend so much time thinking that school is a drag, and instead be excited. They're really naturally excited, creative, curious, they want to learn, they're begging to learn, but they're bored of.
We have lots of middle schoolers in our programs, both in our school-based programs or our school time programs, and we spend very little time reminding them to get off their phones because almost all of our time is outdoors. So I don't know what the exact magic is there, but part of it is just the change of location being outdoors, which is so incredibly stimulating, but it's just not, it's not as much of an issue for us as it is inside the classroom. It's just having that physical break, change of scenery, really takes care of a lot of that.
Also to add, but flexible scheduling also helps family. I remember during the pandemic, we had that Wednesday off. We had advisory students that we would connect, you know, call their family every single week. And because of that, you know, our school won the standing ovation award. And then when we went back from, you know, the first year after the pandemic, we didn't have that time anymore. And then our relationships with our families suffered a lot because of that. And then now this year, when we have the new flexible scheduling model, the families really wanted that time because they sometimes, you know, they need their kids' help with different child rearing things that they're responsible for. So flexible scheduling, it helps the students, it helps the school, and it also helps the family.
I want to talk about that because we haven't spent a lot of time on the parent perspective. So I'm going to add in kind of a question here and just some thoughts as a parent to start off with, which is parents are constantly thinking about coverage throughout the year. You know, we were talking about this in advance of the panel today, right? Just, you know, how we, whether it's our long breaks or an additional day in the calendar. And right now the PD days are kind of all over the place, right? And so like, as a parent, I'm always like, oh my God, did I not schedule a camp for that PD day? There's one next week, how is that happening? We just had one. And so I know parents are constantly like, how do I get coverage for my kids with all these PD days happening? Building some reliability into that, right? Where we know like PD is gonna happen on these Wednesdays that are pre-scheduled, you know, that happen once a month. Building a routine into that be hugely beneficial for parents, right, who need some predictability and coverage often, whether it's for days off, parent-teacher conferences, or other events that we build into the calendar. So just let me stop on that point for a minute. Any thoughts about how this is helpful to parents and parent perspective?
I'd offer one observation, Scott, which is, I think we learned in the pandemic that school communities, including parents at different schools, actually have very different perspectives of this. So, for example, some of the families love having their kids off on Wednesdays off school, or being able to drop in to do tutoring or whatever the schools are offering. And other families who were loud did not like it at all. So I think the idea that is embedded in the report that these are school community created models is important. And we've got some important examples happening now. So for example, BCPS's XQ project, which brings in parents and educators and students into a design process, has 2 schools started with flexible scheduling next year already, because that's what those school communities develop, but they're doing it in their own way. I know Rachel is here from City Bridge, and they're working with a bunch of schools to design school-specific flexible scheduling pilots, I think starting this fall. So in I think, how many schools are there, Rachel?
Hopefully 10 to 15.
Hopefully 10 to 15 schools. And so they have to be unique. And those educators will understand what their families want. So there's no Oh, I think it's size fits all on the parent equation.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, and I think that is part of that, was we talked about earlier, the build consensus first, right? That make sure it works for everyone that's in that school community and that it's tailored to them. And what our job is really just to provide the resources. And there's a bunch of things, the resources, the regulations, the protocols. And so that's kind of what I want to go to next, starting with the deputy mayor, which is how do we make space for this? Because there is no single model that works for every school. And we could just say every school is going to have this later start time, or every school is going to have the enrichment Wednesday, certainly not all at once, right? And so how do you think about the role of the mayor's office, the deputy mayor's office, and other education agencies in the city can play in helping provide that structure, support, the investment to allow schools to do that, and also balancing autonomy, which we really want for schools, and the support of it.
Yeah, it's a very good and powerful and complicated question because it gets at a few different levels that we have to think about. The first one is funding. Because if we're talking about a new model which requires additional adults, which some of the models do, and or requires new partners that are paid for in schools, which some of the models do, you've got to then talk about how do you find the sustainable money to do that. And as a city, we have to decide what's the trade-off, because if what we're saying is we want DC to be a wonderful place for teachers to work and to live and to be the premier place in the country for that to happen, there are lots of different ways in which you can support that. All of them cost money. Take simple affordability measures. We just settled a WTU contract. Teacher comp has gone up. Teachers here are now relatively well paid compared to some of the surrounding jurisdictions. That was, anywhere between $200 and $300 million going backwards, and call it $110 to $120 million going forwards per year going to teacher comp. We could have put that into flexible scheduling pilot, but we put it in comp. Let's say we want to do housing affordability. Now we're doing mortgage assistance, or we're going to establish low subsidized rental units for teachers, which we're building over in 4 days. We could have put that towards flexible scheduling, but we're putting it towards housing subsidies. What about tax subsidies that would actually make the city more affordable, and so on and so forth. So we have to get the balance right, because all of these things are vital, as we know, including what we're talking about here, which is making the schools and the career a wonderful place for our students to go on, as we all work out of professions. So that's a trade-off on the funding side. And the last thing I'll say is there's also regulations, which frankly, we've got to also have a conversation about. Do we actually want to reduce contact hours for into learning experiments? Because we might decide, actually, we don't need as many contact hours in specific courses, because the trade-off for teachers is going to cause them to actually be more effective anyway, right? So there's a balance there that I'm not sure we have a very good answer to, although I'm sure we have perspectives on that. But the regulations we can actually change. Policy is mutable, and we just have to make sure we're doing it in a considered way that still values the learning experience in these new ways. So that's what I would say.
And I'll just add, one thing we didn't talk about in great detail was in the recommendations is what do we call learning? What do we call contact hours, right? So if the school partners are with them and they're doing experiential learning, I think we mentioned in the report, real world history, which is a, third party kind of course that they're taking. Well, they're very much doing world history in that course, right? So is that counting as a contact hour for world history, or is it only when they're sitting in their regularly scheduled world history course that gets scheduled? So thinking about contact hours differently, and not just are we reducing them, but also
what's for the ability to do competency-based instruction that exists in policy, frankly, but that's another way in which we can actually remove teachers and educators, where you actually do spend less time, if students are actually progressing more quickly. So these are things we have to work on.
Thank you. To the rest of the panel, what kind of citywide supports are needed to make this reality for your schools?
So I'm gonna agree with Paul, and I have to say that, not cheap, but Paul really is a very supportive partner to schools and to charter schools particularly, because we're kind of really outside. And so with that same funding, with the WTU contract, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball because we don't get that. And so as he's actually working with us, as we're working with the council to get that, so we can actually support our teachers. But you said something piece about what was learning. And we learned it was different during the pandemic, and we tried to shut So that before that, and at some point, we have to put a stake in the ground and say, it doesn't look the same for every child, then you can't keep trying to do the same thing every time. And so that's where this flexibility comes from, and just say, okay, we don't need 180 hours, it is maybe it's 100 hours, so what I mean, any. And so really just make some real good decisions around that and stop. Yeah.
One other thing I would add is that for tangible thing, but a lot of times we look at schools as an expense and as a very expensive thing instead of an investment. Children don't exist in a vacuum. There's students right now, they're going to be students forever. They're going to be the people that sit next to you on the bus, or the people that walk next to you, that serve you coffee, that you know, you're right. There's so many things that the students are capable of that right now I think that we can put in a box, say with teachers of like you exist in a school. And it's not, it's so much more than that. And just in a conversation around like what we put our money into, it should all be into school. It should be like majority into school because it's everything, right? It's every career, it's every person that the city touches. And I know that's an incredibly big thing to say, especially in policy or politics, but it just makes sense to me. And I know it makes sense to a lot of the students and teachers that they're worth so much more than they're getting everything.
Yeah, I love that thing. Any others on this question?
I feel as though I've been in DC my entire life. I've gone to DC school since I can remember. And schooling is so much more different depending on the school that you go to. And I go to a school that's very community based and teachers care about the students very physically, very noticeably, and they are willing to make amendments for students. And I think that's very important because not every school is a community, despite what they say. And I feel as though it's also very important for a community to be there. So then teachers can then speak on what they know about the students, because administrative staff, they don't work as closely with the students as the teachers know what their students need, because the students, at least at my school, tell teachers what's going on. For a lot of students, we're going through a lot at home. We've got our own responsibilities. And learning is not going to look the same as it did a whole season in the 1900s. So learning in the 2000s is so much more because now we have access to the internet. Now we can actually like get on Zoom and we can get into the classes again. We can actually go on campus and see what we learned. It's so much more different. And having a model that will work 200s going into the 2000s, I don't think that makes any sense. It doesn't make any sense. As someone who grew up with technology, I can really go to Khan Academy and I can search out the West and that. Like, it needs to be changed, not because of anything going on with the school system or everything going on with the school system, but also because the people inside of the school system. It's not the same. It's not going to be the same. When I'm growing up, when I'm out of high school, it's not going to be the same. Right. It needs to change. Right.
And you said like 5 profound things.
Yeah.
So we're gonna pause and have a conversation about each one of them. So I mean, schools being communities, that's so important. So as many people may know, EmpowerEd partners with many schools throughout the city right now on educator wellness work that we do school by school. And one of the things we've discovered in a lot of these partnerships, teams at the schools develop personalized educator wellness plans for them, is how little some people interact across the school in some places, and how little connection sometimes they feel to each other. The teachers, the students, because people are departmentalized, people have meetings that are only their content or only their grade level, they're spread across the school in different ways, and what they're looking for is some connection. But then, Gracie has been working on this a lot with some of our schools, like, we say, okay, so we want to have time together. What you want is more bonding, that you want to build a community, but then that's more time when you don't want to spend more time, right? So we have to change the time we're spending, right? If we want more connection to each other, right? But we also don't want to add on to the time we have and take away from your life. We have to change the time we currently have together in some way. There are so many profound things I'm sure people want to comment on. I'm going to come to Alana for the last question, and we'll open up for other questions and maybe more thoughts on what April shared. We know school partners are essential. They're essential already, so many ways. They're essential certainly to these models becoming a reality. So talk to us about the opportunity we have to expand with our community partnerships. We talked to many out-of-school time providers in preparing this report, and that's how we came up with these cost estimates, which was how much would it cost you to do a half day, to do a full day? What if you did it for these 3 grade levels? So what kind of opportunities do we have with our providers? Partners?
So one thing I wanted to highlight as a potential demonstration model is the DC Department of Energy and Environment is funding a Nation Your Schools grant. The second year was a pilot grant in the 22-23 school year. And there are 4 grantees. It's Urban Adventure Squad and Costa Watershed Society, Living Classrooms in Casey Trees, and we each have a certain number of partner schools that fits our scale. Collectively, we reach about 30 schools. And this is a year-long program that puts us specifically on watershed education, which is not the only area we cover, but we are partnering with the teachers of 1 or 2 grade levels, going in for regular classroom visits. The classroom visits are all outdoors. The requirement of this grant is specifically that it takes place on or near school grounds. It de-emphasizes the idea that field trips mean get on a bus and send kids out of the neighborhood and tell them to, go find nature elsewhere. It's very much rooted in the school and community. All the lessons are prepared by the partners, but done in collaboratively with the teachers so that we're making sure we're coordinating in times that make sense for them. That's a model that can easily be scaled up. It is clearly a funding source that comes from outside of DCPS. I can't speak for all providers. I can tell you that for Urban Adventure Squad, we don't currently receive any money for programming from DC Public Schools. All of the money that we bring in, we serve, often over 1,000 children a year that we are engaging with. All of that is funded through grants, either from other government agencies or from private sources. So it's really important to know that small organizations can have large impacts being, good and registered partners with DC Public Schools, but we are pushing the money into the system. That is not a sustainable model for us, it's important to know. But it has allowed us to partner with many, many schools. There are lots of opportunities for expanding on that in ways that make sense. And if we were looking at it, as April says, each school is a community that builds a community. It is very important for schools to be able to leverage the community-based partners that they're already working with, and for there to be some kind of centralization. So, for example, we serve on the DC Coalition for Equitable Outdoor Education, which is outdoor learning providers, families, DC government officials, where we do a lot of coordinating. We don't have statistics yet on how many schools collectively that we cover, but it's a large impact. I don't think it scratches the surface of how much we could do collectively to expand those efforts. The important thing is, these organizations have to be great community partners who can work directly with principals, with teachers. And when Urban Adventure Squad is planning or starting any kind of program, the first conversations we have are with teachers and principals to say, what would actually work here? What do you need? What would be helpful to you? I think that's where all of these that have really long existing partnerships. The other thing I really want to emphasize is when we talk about what is learning, there's a regular devaluing of what it means to come in as, for example, an after school time provider. Individually, we'll all say that's amazing, children need it, it educates the whole child, but we are devaluing how much learning is actually going on when that happens. Even just how we talked about arts and music and PE as specials, those were often the things that I can't remember exactly, but really during the pandemic that was happening on Wednesdays, but Wednesdays were flexible. There's a lot of learning that happens as part of that, and an educational universe in which kids had more time. For example, instead of having a 45-minute rush period, that's their music once a week, why aren't they doing it for 90 minutes? It gives everyone a chance to actually like read, get set up with instruments or get set up with music and have a little My experience working with teachers is that everyone is kind of breathlessly moving from one step to the next. And we don't get to take a minute together. And the great news about the outdoor and community-based providers is that it gives everyone a chance to take a minute, and pushing that culture into the school system in a way that says this can happen during the school day, and hey, it's learning, it's rich. I think that's a wonderful way forward for the public education system.
Thanks, Alana. And you mentioned principals, and I want to mention one of the cautions in the report, and I think it's very important for principals always, is that we can't just put it on the principal to coordinate this.
Correct.
And so that is why we're asking for the city investment. That's one of the main reasons, which is there are other grants, the DOE, DPR has some grant programs, so there are some grants that cover programming. We need to cover as staff for school to kind of make it work in some way. And so what we propose is actually that the school that would do this would get a community partnerships or a director of the enrichment day or a specific person who coordinates the logistics of the flexible scheduling for that school. Because we know if this is just put on principals and the pile of 1,000 other things they have can be very difficult to achieve. And so that's where the funding is really critical.
Yeah, we have had good examples of that in the school model where we provide a dedicated staff person to do that engagement. So
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go to questions in the last 15-20 minutes we have here from both the live audience and then anyone either on the Zoom or on the YouTube page. So if you're tuning in on the live stream, please feel free to drop questions in, and that will monitor that for us, and we can start with the questions. Anyone has one from here? Yes, go ahead.
This has been incredibly powerful, and I feel like the models exist and the work is going on, and I was just very inspired by. But Paul Kine, I think, raised the pivotal issue, which is that all of this work is not going to scale, and it is not planned to go to scale. Alana said that Urban Adventure Squad and the organizations that you're partnered with, what, 3 others? Yes. Yeah, with the grant, impact 30 schools. So it's happening at a scale that is not making DC public education relevant, as Lucia said, to what's needed in this time. So my question is, other than EmpowerEd raising this issue of flexible public as, the thing we should be talking about, is there anything else? Is anybody else kind of raising this to a movement building level of conversation? And how does that happen?
So thank you for the question. And before we jump into the panel thoughts, I do just want to mention, as Deputy Mayor mentioned before, that Rachel is here from City Bridge, which is doing a lot on this. There are other organizations that are doing partners. And I think between those already involved in the partners, like you said, there are, our survey found that about 35 schools are doing this in some way or another. When we dug into what people said were the models, I would say about 25 of them are really implementing a flexible model for staff. And we have these new pilots going on. So they're in pilot form. But the question is about how we scale.
I think that's a really important point, and I think the thing to keep in mind is that you can't build that movement without pilots. And one of the things that I've noticed about, so for example, the Nature in Your School grant that I referred to, we're covering 30 schools this year. I don't know on my the numbers for what it was last year, but that grant did not exist before the pandemic. There is a pandemic response motivation to the setup of that grant, and it represents just one slice of school coverage and models that could work. So when I mentioned DC scores, they're in lots of schools. Food Friends is in maybe 15 schools, I want to say. There's an embedded teacher in those schools. So when a school system decides that it's culturally important to make a change, then organizations like ours start to come together in communities of just in our spaces, very much like what Scott was talking about with the teachers. The teachers are in their areas of the school getting their stuff done and they don't have a minute to look up and say, how can I connect with other teachers on the other side of the school building who I don't get to see? Well, as soon as they have that opportunity, different kinds of collaboration happens and you start to make change. We've seen a lot of change in the understanding around outdoor learning, for example, because that's our thing. Pre-pandemic, it was, you know, the focus was like, as far as kindergarten and early childhood education, we keep pushing and saying, you know, we're missing the message here. But people started to connect to that message when everybody was in lockdown and the best thing you could do was take a walk around the neighborhood. And then you start to see that the neighborhood is an incredibly, you know, natural classroom, the natural environment, the built environment. So once we start to talk about it and have pilot projects, and once our elected leaders start to talk about it and put money behind it, then you have a movement, a culture that looks a lot different than it does now.
Another thing I would add that we've all touched on briefly in the report as well is just staffing in general. There isn't enough staffing in schools to begin with. There's not enough substitute teachers to help teachers, and it puts a lot of burden on them. And I'm teaching seniors this year, not a single one of them wants to be a teacher. They said it in unison multiple times, so they have to do your job. And I think that that's, you know, teaching is not an attractive profession right now, especially with all of the articles about how teachers are being burnout and everything. So when you get these pilot programs in place, and you get like Washington Teacher Union, salary increase, like, all of those things are helping bit by bit, but it really is a slow process to get people to one, want to be teachers, to want to stay in teaching, and then once they're in teaching, you let people that work. So it is really difficult.
I want to, if I can just pile on, because I couldn't agree with that before, and I think I come at this in a very specific way, which is I actually think Washington DC has a very strong public school system. When you just look at the facts over the past decade, and you look at the increase in graduation rate, you look at the increase in learning that we've seen, you look at the NAEP results, DC is over on the right-hand side. It has seen the most growth of any city in the country. That doesn't mean that everything is perfect, and that doesn't mean we don't have a long way to travel to get there, but we're strong. Now, how are we able to humans and reduce the opportunity gaps that we see across the city? We're only going to do that if our teachers remain strong and healthy and passionate in their community. And so I do think this takes a movement. And I do think it requires us to think about not only what is life like for teachers in schools that we're talking about now, but what is life like for teachers in the city. And there are lots of ways we can work together to build a culture that actually respects and honors teachers in new ways. When I go to schools and I ask kids if they want to be teachers, they also all say, they laugh basically. And that's not right. Teaching is actually a wonderful profession. We have to look at our pathways into the profession. We're doing what we don't have time to talk about it here, but we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to get our students excited about teaching. And then we have to look at the profession in schools. And then we have to look at the city as a whole. Is it a city that is welcoming and attractive to teachers? And there are things we can do on many dimensions. So specifically, there are lots of people working on what life is like for teachers in buildings, including a lot of school communities that are just doing it because they know they have to, thinking about states as one example, and many, many others. Rachel might want to talk for a minute about what City Bridge is doing, because they're piloting 10 or 15 schools this fall on exactly this topic, trying to work with communities. And then XQ, as I mentioned before, is another place. So you've got this momentum building around ensuring that we remain a wonderful place for teachers, because we have to in order to grow our strength as a system. But Rachel, you want to spend a minute?
Yeah, so one thing I think we're not talking about is the money that we save when we solve these problems. So one thing they say in corporate America is it costs a whole lot more to gain a new customer than to retain an existing one. And so we're talking about what we need to put in to make these transformations, but we're not able to quantify how different it's going to look and how much money we're going to save when we have a stable, healthy teaching force across the board. I will also just say, I think, and this is both a comment, but also kind of a question for the panelists. I think there's a relationship here between the isolation in the teacher scale and one teacher, one classroom model, which is also a huge source of burnout, and this flexible scheduling conversation. And so I'm curious, for those of you who are doing this flexible work, how has that shifted how you think about staffing across your school and sort of pivoting from what I was saying this more the framework of a teacher record with paraprofessionals, instructional aides versus more fluid teams of teachers that are really collaborating about supporting the student.
So for us, it's. So there are grade level teams. And we realized that the grade level teams were in like a silo, like sixth grade had no idea what was going on. And so we had to figure out something else to do. So we instituted something called houses. So we're on Howard's campus and our colors are red, blue, and white. And so we have random red, blue, and white houses. And they have different activities. So they have meeting times, they compete on attendance. So, and the kids are also spread out as well. So right now, White House is winning attendance. So they're going around talking to kids and it's teachers as well. So just finding an opportunity for them to come together outside of that and giving them targets to shoot for. So the targets were NWEA first, so what's your house doing? And so the houses got together and did all of that. And so really you have to look inside to find ways to break those circles. And so we could get competitive too. And so, I mean, it's competitive, but nothing like this, so you can have a day to wear what you want kind of thing. But it was great because it's like, you know, hey, we're going to get together, we're going to do this particular thing. So we just had to look for a way to kind of break those walls down. But it's a conscious effort.
To add, Mondays, I said that we have flexible scheduling. So one of the things that we added or trying to continue is Elevate Academy, where we have 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, so about 20 kids in each grade level. And the Elevate Academy teachers have been collaborating together. So some of the benefits are mentorship. We have our 6th graders being mentored by our 8th grade students. And we have a teacher who's planning the trips for the Elevate Academy. So we're sharing the work. And that is definitely one of the benefits of that.
Thank you. I want to go to our student rep on the state board.
Hello, I had a question about, I think this is very similar to the first question that was asked, but when we think about it from a policy perspective and collaborations with council and the DME's office and the chancellor and the state board and OSCE and all those groups. What kind of things should we be looking for? And what kind of balance should we seek to have with both like enough support? So like Scott was saying, principals don't have to take on the brunt of the work. But also enough flexibility that schools can do and collaborate with things like LSAT and student groups to figure out like what works for them. What kind of things should we be looking for in these areas?
So first of all, thank you for your service on board. Thanks for being here. I think it's a very, very important question. Do you mean things in terms of citywide supports and resources that should be available, or do you mean just within this community? How should they be figuring out from an approach perspective what they want to do?
I think both. So like Scott talked about like the WTU contract and how like it might be different for charter schools that are still trying to resolve these issues. So where can we see maybe cross organization collaboration and what kind of policies or legislation should be turning to OSCE and council and different groups kind of look at?
So I have probably a partial answer to your question, and that is that what we're going to do now is look at the places where this is happening either organically or through support. So I mentioned XQ was a place where we have 2 CPS high schools actually fully engaged in flexible scheduling next year. We want to look at that and understand where do we have to waive requirements or regulation? Where do we have to try and find additional resources if we want to do it in a sustainable way? We'll look at the pilots that are happening across the schools here. We're investigating those. Again, I'm talking about the City Bridge pilots where they're doing this considered approach to flexible scheduling and they're codifying what they're learning. And so that way, we're going to understand what we think school communities actually need. That's why my answer is partial, because right now we don't exactly know. And in that sense, we don't quite know what the trade-offs are. We know some fundamental truths. It has to be oriented towards the actual school community and can't do no one size fits all, as we said in the report. We know there are different models, some of which cost more, some of which require different adults and so forth. So the one final thing I'll add is that this year my office is leading something called an adequacy study, which hasn't been done since 2013, and we're very excited about this because the question we're asking is not what do we think, well, it is in part what do we think it takes to get to an adequate school, but more importantly, what does it take to actually resolve the opportunity gap in the system? And that include else you need in the building. So we're gonna be looking at schools across the city and figuring out what's the staffing like, who's in the building, and who do you need in order to be successful as a school. And that will also be an important contribution to this conversation. Because part of it might be, you need enough people to allow teachers to stay in the buildings for longer, because that's what adequacy actually means. So that's a partial response, but others may be wise.
Thank you. Before we go, we have just a few minutes left. Are there any questions virtually? Okay, so I saw, so Sam.
Thank y'all for this, you may have kind of, you sort of touched on this already. I'm just trying to get an idea of, given budget considerations, what's the feasibility of following through with $10 million request, given what we already have status quo, and with that, what would the distribution of the school look like in terms of awards, public versus charter, social economic, all of that?
Thanks for that. Thank you for the question. Right now, we're actually in the middle of the budget development process, and so we don't know what the city budget is going to look like. I can share with you that this idea that we've got to continue to find ways to support teachers in the profession is very active in those discussions, that the mayor will deliver her budget at the end of March, and then it will go to council. And so at that point, we'll be able to talk about specifics, but at this point, we don't know specifically what's going to be in the budget.
Follow up. But as far as what you heard today during the presentation, with the budget not coming out until March, are you going to go back to the drawing board, with fellow deputy mayors and put this on the table, see where it fits, defend the pot?
So the idea of flexible scheduling is not a new idea, certainly not new today. We've been hearing from teachers. I think every single school visit I do when I gather people together, they talk about how the profession's changed, how they would like some additional flexibility. It does sound and feel different in different schools, as I've shared and we talked about here. So this is very much a live part of our ongoing discussions about what we can do to sustain and nurture the profession at large. And as I said, there are lots of choices that we'll have to make as a city. I certainly want to collectively, and this is certainly one. In the meantime, we're doing a lot to support and promote where this is currently happening and where it's being funded with philanthropic dollars as an important push on islands.
Thank you. I'm gonna do one more question as we run out of time here and go to Mr. Willis.
So I'm gonna try to be quick, Deputy Kim. Thank you for being here, everybody. This is fantastic. With regard, and this is kind of like a budget issue too, I guess, with regards to community schools, which will impact flexible scheduling. I just wonder what the probability is, because I think it's a low number of schools right now in the city that have access to community schools, which brings in community partners, et cetera. So what's the probability of that being expanded to reach more schools across the city? And I'm thinking in particular about schools where trauma is high, right? And so if we can have more community schools in those particular wards in the city, that's going to bring community partners in. So, with the challenges we have right now with teenage crime rate, et cetera, that's rising, one great possibility for helping these students to respect their city more is by having community partners come and push into their schools. So then their horizon is broadened because they see more than just the schoolhouse itself. They see more than just the neighborhood because the community is taking time to come where they are, meet them where they are. But with the community schools right now, the access to it is so limited. What is the probability of that being expanded, in particular in the wards where we have such trauma, high levels of trauma?
Yeah, I think we have 20 or 30 community schools in the city. I know we've got OSSI funding that provides the staff member comparable to what we were talking about here. I don't know if we're going to expand that this year. I do know that we are committed to that as a model for the very reasons that you're describing. And in addition to that, we are indeed funding more community partnerships. Our Safe Passage Safe Blocks program relies on community partners. As you know, we're hiring trusted community members to be in and around schools that go to some of what you're describing. Some of our high impact tutoring work actually does come with an additional coordinator to help ensure that the partners who are involved in that tutoring work are integrated fully into the school community, but the principal doesn't have to attend to them. And I think that also goes partially to what you're describing. And the community school model is one to which we are committed. I don't know if it will grow this year, but I know we're planning on sustaining and continuing to learn from it for the reasons that you're describing.
If I could just add a point that perhaps if it can be expanded, then this will working as proactive as opposed to adding more SROs to schools, which oftentimes is after the fact or increases more trauma. If community schools can be taken to the table in terms of a proactive measure, again, to have these city community members come and push into the schools, that's going to impact perhaps how the students see the schools and see the city as a whole. So that could be mentioned as well.
Yeah, we fully agree with you. Again, in the Safe Passage Safe Blocks program, part of the model is for the community organizations and community members to push into the schools to work with the young people, particularly on things like skill building, conflict resolution, and so on. Because that's really, really important part of what you're describing. But again, it's not a full answer to this incredible challenge, but we are actually making some progress. So thank you.
Last word from our student.
Yes, going off how to close the opportunity gap. I think that sometimes instead of asking who you need, it's maybe asking what you need instead. Because a Ward 2 school is going to be so much different from a Ward 7 or 8 school. And I feel as though in order to close the opportunity gap, it would mean leveling the playing field. And in DC, I don't know if that's possible since the playing field is so much more higher for wards closer to 1 compared to wards closer to 7, if that makes sense. The gaps are just too different. It's too big. I guess it could be closed, but a Ward 2 school is not going to be the same and it's going to have significantly more opportunities compared to a Ward 8 or 7 school. And also the communities there are it's not the same. And it doesn't look the same. The children there are not going to be raised the same. The financial, economic standing of the children in those 2 wards are not going to be the same. And I don't think that, unless you saw that, I don't know if you're actually going to give children in DC actually what they really need in order to close the gap. Because it's just a lot of different factors that goes into the schooling that affects the schooling, that affects the teachers, that could be solved significantly faster or significantly slower based on the community or the children or the families there and they're standing there. And I don't know, I just feel as though in order to solve that, it's going to be solving significantly more or other issues to then get to that place.
April, thanks so much for ending on that because that's why we're all here, right? That's why we're all in this work to try to solve that issue. And it does require a lot more than just our education system to be active in solving those problems. And I'll quote a former member of the Public Charter School Board, Steve Mumbaugh, who remind people frequently that maxim was, are we giving poor kids what rich kids have access to or get? And if we're not, think about what you're doing in advocacy. And I think that's it's something I keep on my mind because when we think about how we implement models like the flexible scheduling, it is about our educator retention. But we have this graphic as you see out there, educator wellness, student wellness as a virtuous cycle. Because we believe that those 2 things are very much connected. And why we care about our educator well-being is for the educators themselves, but also because their role is there to serve our students. And one feeds really into the other, right? And supports the other. And so we have to support the students, we have to support our families holistically to make that happen and make sure we're delivering models that do both of those things well, that enrich the student experience. Now, like I said earlier about the camps, they give certain children in our city access to things they don't ordinarily have because of this flexibility. And so that our parents can be assured and our families can be assured that these models will be a huge step forward for their students in schools, as well as the educators who will hopefully stay for the long term. I want to thank everyone on the panel. Thank you so much for being here, for our audience, for everyone who's joined us virtually for today. This is, as the deputy mayor said, not the beginning of the conversation. These things have been talked about for a while, but the pandemic has really put a supercharge in these conversations. And we hope that this contributes to that conversation in a meaningful way, as well as the work that's being done by other partners in the city in a way that we can really seize this moment to make sure that education is not left behind, a conversation that is happening in every other workplace, and we can make sure we have a great educator workforce and great services for all of our students and families in the city. There are a lot of ways to get involved, which we'll follow up on. If people have a chance to read the report and playbook, we'd encourage you to please contact EmpowerEd to continue to give us your feedback, especially our principals. I know I think we had over 50 principals sign up for the live stream there. So if we have our principals, please continue to give us feedback on what this looks like for your school, how you think this might be able to work, and what you need from the city to make it happen. So thank you again for being here, and we look forward to all the next steps and making this happen together.
Yeah.